Alexander of Macedon. We are still in the passage of the Chariot of the Sun. Philip, being away as usual. Ptolemy muttered, with all the companions, there is no one above the rank of captain to do the honors for these folk. In fact, the envoys had dismounted and were standing in the shade while the baggage came up, looking around with amusement at the rambling streets of Pella. Then a woman, house slave, hurried to Alexander, saying all in a breath, the lady Olympias, your mother, greets you, bidding you salute the ambassadors and find quarters for them. Alexander edged forward, his throat dry, unable to think of words. His mother had this way of forcing him to do things. She was more imperious than Philip, who contented himself with watching the boy quizzically, as if he were a fowl of dubious breed. The visitors paid no attention to the boy, who wore an old wool shirt and loose riding trousers. When he had wine brought out for them, they refused it carelessly. It seemed they preferred water. The Magians among them wore white silk. Their dark faces were thin and intent. They spoke in low, quick voices as they inspected trays of gold objects and lengths of silk, pearl soon. That must have been gifts. Alexander heard Ptolemy laughing, but he was fascinated by the Persian horse that had a square of padded leather strapped behind its shoulders with a cord dangling down on each side. The cord ended in twin loops. Footrests, explained one of the visitors who could speak Greek. And if you're wondering why the pronunciation sounds weird, I'm trying to make it sound Greek, not knowing all the time what the actual Greek spelling would be. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Immediately Alexander swung himself to the back of the horse, which reared, startled. The boy caught the rein, clung close to the great arched neck. Please, he got his feet into the loop, and the horse quieted. A servant tried to pull the presumptuous boy off the horse, but an interpreter who had sighted Alexander above the crowd warned the visitors, low voice, this is the only son of the king of the Macedonians. Others are idiots, are bastards. The ambassadors, sipping their water, studied Alexander calmly and answered his questions about the horses. His fear and shivering had left him. Once he had to grapple with the great horse. On such horses, the visitors explained, they could ride 500 stadia, 6,000 paces in a day between sunset and sunrise. Because of the heat of their lands, they often rode in this fashion, and during the hours of darkness. The roads of Asia were wider than 3 streets of Pella, and relays of horses were kept at stations along the routes, so that by changing horses they could go without stopping. This fired Alexander's curiosity. His questions tumbled out one after the other. How far had they come? How had the crossing of the great sea been made? How was their king called? Artaxerxes? I'm not sure the Greek spelling or how to pronounce that. That doesn't sound right. The great king, the king of the lands of the earth. These lands, what were they, and how far did they stretch towards the place of the sun's rising? And this the ambassadors could not tell him. Not one of them had journeyed the breadth of the great king's lands. They only knew that 23 nations inhabited those lands. One of them had heard it said that if a rider were to journey along the post roads without stopping from west to east, he might come to the far end of the empire in 100 days. And how many days have ye spent in crossing Macedon? 3. Alexander had forgotten about welcoming these ambassadors and ushering them to quarters. The Asiatics were sitting around the steps, helplessly, and the boy was deep in his questions when a silence fell, as abruptly as a cloud passes over the sun. His mother, Olympias, appeared on a terrace above them, escorted by kinsman Leonidas and a few guards, and the priestess coming before the curtains of the mysteries could have attracted more attention. Indeed, she looked like the princess she was, with myrtle twisted into her dark curling hair, her girdle shaped like a silver snake, her voice chiming melodious as a golden bell. Greeting to the envoys of the great king of Asia. Olympias of Macedon bids them enter her home. I should have. No, I shouldn't have tried doing a female voice. The ambassadors neither answered nor moved at once. They were startled. Olympias, no more than 30 years of age, was the most striking woman of the northern mountains, and she knew well how to frame herself against a background. The gray monotone of granite walls and gnarled oaks brought out the coloring of her flesh, the challenge of her eyes. In silence, the ambassadors began to climb the stairs, picking up the trays. "What nice gifts," she smiled. "Shall I accept them for Philip?" Alexander thought, "She is very angry with my blundering." Ptolemy thought, "How well she places herself in the center of the stage." Aloud he asked the boy, "You have questioned them about everything except the girls of Asia." "Women in the East," Alexander defended absently, "are secluded and veiled. They live apart from men who do not talk about them. At least, so Herodotus says." "Well, if you're content to learn about girls from books, Achilles. Suddenly Ptolemy laughed. "If that's so, I wonder what they think about Olympias." What the Persians thought about Olympias was not easy to discover. They hid their thoughts and uttered only complimentary speeches. Yet the Magians among them kept their eyes turned away from the lovely queen of the Macedonians, as if the sight of her might do them injury. Well, you certainly don't want to lust after the queen, do you? Even if she wants it, so that could be problematic, right? Ptolemy noticed this hopefully. His mother, Arsinoe, had the superior education of a Greek prostitute, and she had warned him that Olympias was a dominant woman intending on ruling, yet not intelligent enough to do so wisely. The dark-browned Olympias, Arsinoe confided to him, was still at heart what she had been before marriage, a girl devoted to the wild rites of Dionysos. The Dionysian rites? Yeah. I should know that word in Greek, but maybe I don't. She had never matured into a wife. She would never escape the slavery of her own ungovernable temper. Besides, even though a princess by birth, the Despoina Olympias was stupid. She had been brought up an orphan in the forest of Epirus, and had given herself with passion to orgiastic worship of the hidden entities. Jinn, probably. So the intelligent Arsinoe enlightened her son, warning him that he must never offend Olympias in a personal matter, that would be as dangerous as stepping upon one of her tame snakes. That evening, after Olympias had received with her own hands all the gifts of the ambassadors from Asia intended for Philip, she sent for Alexander, and, as he had anticipated, tongue-lashed him with fury. "What a dumb calf you are! What a bookworm! Burrowing into dusty rows of writing! Archidas could have greeted the ambassadors more fittingly." She had taken the myrtle out of her thick hair, and was combing it savagely, paying no attention to the slave girl who tried to help her, and her words had barbs upon them, because Archidaus was Alexander's bastard half-brother who went around stealing food and stuffing his mouth, so he always slavered and stammered when he tried to speak. The kinsman knew, and Alexander suspected that because Archidaus had been born of a Thessalian dancing girl, Olympias could not tolerate the sight of him, and had fed him as a child enough poison to numb his mind without killing him. Now, if the father commits adultery, don't punish the children. Alexander said nothing, knowing that his mother would get over her rage quickly. Feeding your mind with dreams about Achilles, she muttered, wenching at a coil of hair. When you have no more passion than a calf. Alexander waited. Of course the tutors call you Achilles, and do you know why? To please me, although, she relaxed a little, do you have a splendid body for a stripling? But why did you have to seize upon a pad in the back of a horse to argue about with the envoys? Hadn't you seen a thing like that before? No, Alexander began to explain eagerly, and that thing they call a saddle makes it much easier to keep your seat when the horse... Yes, the horse. Precisely the horse. There speaks the Macedonian farmer. There speaks the breathing, living image of Philip, the son of Amontas, the horse breeder. Do you wonder, child? Olympias now addressed the little slave. Let the Greeks say the forebears of the Macedonians were centaurs, men above and horses beneath. Even now you can't separate a Macedonian from his horse. Woman's getting jealous of the horses, isn't she? Perhaps that's why, the boy laughed, our cavalry can ride around the Greeks. This pleased Olympias, who longed to see in her backward Alexander some instinct of leadership, such as the boy Ptolemy displayed. Unfortunately, Alexander was not really interested in cavalry, only in horses. That was a Macedonian trait. They were all farmers at heart. Even the phalanxmen were being drilled in a new way by Philippe insisted on returning home for the spring planting and the fall harvesting. That is one of Philippe's pet ideas, she answered her own thought, rather than Alexander's word. A military aristocracy of the soil, a nation that is an army that is a moving nation, farming and fighting. The Greeks found out long ago that a soldier can't be a proper citizen, and the other way around. Sometimes Olympias probed shrewdly at the truth. An accomplished actress, she could recognize pretense in others, and she had very few illusions. Moreover, her ancestors had ruled over folk who came to the princess of Epirus, Albania, to have sickness healed. Our omens explained. The orphan girl, Olympias, had been in truth the youthful princess and priestess of a people. Now upon her son Alexander centered her jealousies, her passion, and her longing to create a second dominant self. She fought in Alexander everything that might belong to Philip. But particularly, she impressed upon the boy the inferiority of his father's people, the Macedonians. They had lived, she pointed out, too long in their mountains, keeping to the old ways of clan life. You know, clan with the C, not the K, right? They had no true nobility, even to the companions who accompanied and advised Philip, were no more than the owners of the biggest horse herds. Their songs were herders' chants, their dances bucolic stampings and whirlings. When they stacked up the last of the harvest, they were still afraid of omens and of drought and pestilence among the animals. Among these, Macedonians Had there ever been one orator, one philosopher, or general, or monarch equal in fame to a second-rate Athenian, Alexander knew well the ignoble part of his people had played in great events. Macedonian foresters had hewn the timber that floated down to the sea and built Athenian warships. Macedonian horse breeders had supplied the Greek cities with animals. Their farmers had produced the barley, grapes, and meat requisitioned and paid for by the invading armies of the great kings, Darius and Xerxes. I don't know how to say Xerxes right. The highly educated Greeks had a right to call the Macedonians